खुदा में रज़वी हो।
अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह सुम्मा अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह। By the grace of Allah and the mercy of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, once again we have another JUMMAH. We have another day of Eid, because the beloved Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said that JUMMAH is the day of Eid, is Yawm al-Eid. It is a day of immense blessings, when the mercy of Allah descends in abundance upon the ummah of the beloved Rasul sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. Allah Almighty has granted us, the ummah of the beloved Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, of the unique and a very special excellence. And we are so fortunate as the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that those nations that lived for 900 to 1,000 years at a time did not attain that which we have attained in our short space of time. In the short span of life that we have, the amount of barakat and the blessings that Allah bestows upon us is much more than has been given to any nation before. And the reason for this is because we are the ummah of the beloved Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. I think I have said this before and you know it well, that Allah Almighty has made His beloved Nabi sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam the greatest in the creation. There is nobody like Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. There was nobody like Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and there will be nobody like Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allah has made him the most exalted in the entire creation, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the deen of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam the most exalted. And Allah has bestowed upon the people the most exalted book amongst the believers, who is the Quran Majid. And with all of that, Allah has made us the most exalted of all nations. The greatest ummah of every ummah that came on this dunya is the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And why do we attain this excellence? Only and only because of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. This excellence is only and only because of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And in the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allah Almighty has given special excellence to those beloved servants of Almighty Allah who have spent their days and their nights in the ta'at and in the ibadat of Almighty Allah, in the obedience of Almighty Allah. Allah has given us so many years in our lives. There are some who live longer than others, there are some who live less. But in the time that Allah has given us, each one of us needs to take stock of ourselves spiritually. Each one has to understand that in the time that I have spent on this earth up to now, how much of time have I spent to please my Creator, and how much of time have I spent displeasing my Creator? We are all here for long periods of time. Even if you are for 10 years and 20 years, it's still a long time. But how much of the time that we live do we spend to please our Rabb? How much of time do we spend to prepare for the Akhirat? Think about it. This dunya is fani. This dunya will perish. All the wealth, all the buildings, everything that we have is going to perish. Everything of the dunya will go. Leave alone the things of the dunya. The dunya is going to go. Nothing is going to be left. Yet we strive more for this than we strive for the Akhirat. We strive more for this dunya than we strive for our abode in the Akhirat. What will be our condition in the hereafter, and how will our abode be in the Akhirat? The condition of attaining a blessed abode is Iman. The condition of attaining a blessed abode is Iman. If a person leaves the world with Iman, he is successful. If he left the dunya with Iman, he is successful. And if he left the dunya with everything and no Iman, there comes it. He has failed, he has been unsuccessful. But the best way to attain success, the great scholars have said that if you want to be kamyab here and you want to be kamyab in the hereafter, then the best way to do that is to become a slave of the slaves of the slaves of the court of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Humble yourself before those who are accepted in the court of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, and have sharam, have modesty, have haya, have fear. The reason that we are falling into this deep abyss of guna is because people have stopped fearing. People have stopped having haya. The beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Al-haya'u shu'batun min al-iman." The beloved Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Iman is haya, modesty is a branch of your faith. It is a branch of your faith." But people don't care about this. Why? Because we are too busy running behind the dunya. We are too busy earning the dunya. We are too busy claiming what we think is ours in the dunya. But we have forgotten that your biggest claim is in the akhirat. Your biggest claim is in the akhirat. Hazrat Ustaz Zaman, Shahanshah Sukhan, Hazrat Allama Maulana Hasan Raza Barelvi, Rahmatullahi Ta'ala alayhi, who is the younger brother of Sayyidi Ala Hazrat Adimul Barakat, radiyallahu anhu, he says very beautifully, I shared this couplet yesterday. He says, Khuda sagane nabi se ye mujhko sunwa de. Khuda sagane nabi se ye mujhko sunwa de. हम अपने कुत्तों में तुझको शुमार करते हैं. हम अपने कुत्तों में तुझको शुमार करते हैं. From the Nabi's loyal dogs. He says, from the Nabi's loyal dogs. Here, dog, son, kutta means slave, servant. But it is a sign of humility that you are calling yourself a dog. In other words, the lowest of the slaves. But the reason the word dog is used, because dog is loyal, generally to his master. A dog is generally wafadar and loyal to his master. So a true dog, a true slave is one who is loyal in the court of the beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he says, Khuda sagan, sagan is the plural of the plural word. Khuda sagan nabi se ye mujhko sunwa de, hum apne kutton mein tujhko shumar karte hain. From the Nabi's loyal dogs, may Allah let me be hearing. Ustaz Zaman is saying that you must be able to hear this from those who are the true servants of Allah. You must be able to hear this from those who are the true slaves of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Khuda sagane nabi se ye mujhko sunwa de, from the Nabi's loyal dogs. Loyal dogs, may Allah let me be hearing. Hearing what? Among our personal loyal dogs, you too we are counting. In other words, amongst our own slaves, you too we are counting. He says, when you do that, then you are successful here and you are successful in the hereafter. Because those who are regarded as loyal in the court of Allah are calling you their loyal slaves. Now the pious servants of Allah, they strive their entire lives to be in the company of the pious. That is why Allah is saying in the Quran, I read this ayat almost every Jummah, وَكُونُوا مَعَ الصَّادِقِينَ. Keep the company of pious people. Keep the company of virtuous people. Keep the company of meritorious people. The Quran is not telling you anyway, keep the company of those people who got the most money. It's not telling you keep the company of those who have the highest buildings. It doesn't tell you keep the company of those who own the most land. It tells you keep the company of those who fear Allah. Keep the company of the pious. Who are the pious? Jiske dil mein khauf khuda hai. Those who truly fear Allah. And when these servants fear Allah, then they reach a level of excellence when you and I cannot even fathom. We cannot even understand. Why? Because whatever they do not do for the dunya. Whatever they do in the dunya, they do whilst preparing for the akhirat. Whatever they do, this is the very important thing. And I think this is where most of the people slip. This is what everybody seems to not catch. That this dunya, we know it. Nobody can say that we don't know it. Everybody knows it that you're not going to be here forever. But the problem that we have is that in our subconscious we forget it. In our subconscious we forget it because we are overwhelmed by this pomp and the splendor of this dunya. We are overwhelmed by the pomp and the splendor of this dunya which will perish one day. The pious servants of Allah, no matter what happens, they have this in front of them. Mouth is going to come. Death is closer to you and I than our jugular vein. It is going to come. It is going to come. And nobody can evade it. Nobody can evade it. No matter how powerful, no matter how wealthy we may be, we cannot evade death. Nobody can evade death. Because when the surah is blown, when Allah commands and He wills, then even the angel of death will be finished, will leave. Even he will pass away. Nobody can evade death. That is why the pious servants of Allah have kept death in front of them. They have kept the akhirat in front of them. Whatever they did for the hereafter. Hazrat Sayyidina Imam Yafi'i radiallahu anhu explains a beautiful narration. He says, a person who lived in Abadan, there was a pious man who lived in Abadan. Abadan is an island close to Shat al-Arab in Iran. Okay? So, he says, Imam Yafi'i said there used to be a pious man who used to live in Abadan. And that pious man says that I lived in Abadan for almost 60 years. Please listen with the heart. He says, I lived in Abadan for over 60 years. And after living there for 60 years and more, I knew one thing very well, that nobody drinks water from the lake or the river that is there. In that place nobody used to drink, it's an island. But the water from the river nobody used to drink, from the lake, from the channel. Why? Because it was so brackish. The water was so brackish, so salty, that you couldn't even put one drop in your mouth. Okay? It was not possible for you to swallow it. So everybody knew that you drank from everywhere else, you wouldn't drink directly from the river. He said everybody knew that that water was very brackish and nobody can manage to drink it. He says, but there was one buzurg, there was one Allah-fearing servant who lived in Abadan, but he was from Sahil. Okay? He was originally from a place called Sahil, near the Arab areas. And he lived in Abadan. He says, one day I saw him in the month of Ramadan. How it happened? He says it was the month of Ramadan, and at that time in Abadan it was midsummer. Extreme heat. And we had just made iftar, and I was preparing to perform salah. But when I looked in the earthen container, you must remember, not like us in those days, you open the tap and the water comes and you still don't appreciate it. Imagine if you have to just make shukr for that water that drops out of the tap, which we quench our thirst with, and which we perform wudu and make ourselves pak. Leave everything else in the creation. Only make shukr for that water that comes through your taps. In those days they didn't have that. They went and they filled water from the wells and from wherever else, and they kept it in these huge earthen containers, clay pots. So he says, after making iftar, I decided I needed to make fresh wudu. So I went to the mashkiza, or the clay pot, and I found that the water was finished. I found that the water was finished. Whoever was before me performed wudu and they finished the water. So he said, I went to the river. I went to the river to make wudu. Today the water flows in your tap, and people are lazy to make wudu and stand on the musalla. Imagine if they had to go to rivers today, what would happen? How many musallis would have been in the masjid? Think about it, let's be honest. How many people, except for those whom Allah has guided, will perform the salah? The water is coming out of your tap. You can't use it to make wudu because you're too lazy. Because there's a match on the TV. Because shaitan has drawn you to something else. The water is coming through the tap. You just have to turn it and get it. Make wudu and stand in the ibadat of Allah. Ye bhi nahi kar sakte log. Imagine if you had to go to a river to make wudu, or go and drop buckets from a well to make wudu. What would have been the hal of the people today? Kya hal hota? So he goes to the river, this Allah-fearing servant, and he says, there I saw this elderly, pious, Allah-fearing banda, who used to be from Sahil but was now living in Abadan. He said, I saw him standing inside the river. I saw him standing not close, not very far away from the shore of the river. He was standing on the bank, just there in the water. And he said, I heard him making one dua. He was standing inside the water and making dua. He was standing in a river and making dua. You know what dua he was making? He said, Oh my Rabb, oh my Creator, if you are pleased with my actions, and if you are pleased with my obedience towards you, then only I want to present a plea in your court. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Standing in the water, in the river, and making dua to his Rabb. Imagine if this was his condition standing in a river, what must have been his condition when he's standing on the musalla. This is to wake our heart up. We were talking about the last 2 weeks, the journey of the heart. This too is the journey of the heart. He says, he was making dua, oh my Creator, if you are pleased with my actions and pleased with my obedience towards you, then I would like to present a plea, a humble plea in your majestic court. Oh Allah. He said, for me to fulfill your command, to perform salah, to fulfill your command, the water in the hammam, in the public bath is enough for me. He said, if it wasn't for your wrath, I would not even taste a bit of any water. This is a spiritual language. This is a riddle. He's saying, oh Allah, I could have used the water of the hammam, but I came here for your pleasure. And because there I could not find water to drink, he needs to drink water. Nothing. And you can't drink this water also. It's so brackish. After saying this, the narrator says, after that pious servant of Allah said this while standing in the water, I saw him take a handful of water and drink it. I saw him drink it. He said, I was amazed to see this, because nobody drank the water of the river of Abadan. Because it was so brackish, you couldn't swallow a drop. He took an entire handful and he just gulped it. He drank it. He said, I watched him, and when he left, I went to the spot. I went to the spot where he took a handful of water, and I said, let me try this too. He said, I went to that spot where that Allah-fearing servant drank from water that was brackish and from which the people never drank. He said, I went there and I stood exactly where he stood. I marked the spot with my sight. I went there and I took that water and I put the water into my mouth. He said, by Allah, I have never tasted anything sweeter in my life. Allahu Akbar. By Allah, I have never tasted anything sweeter. It was sweeter than sugar. That brackish water was sweeter than sugar. He said, I drank to my satisfaction. It was hot. It was the month of Ramadan, iftar time. I drank as much as I could until I was satisfied, and then I left. He said, I tried to find that servant of Allah. Suddenly he appeared to me. Listen, I'm ending with this. Suddenly he appeared to me. One day, he met me and he says to me, you come here. Come here. Go to him. He says, I had a dream. I had a dream. And in the dream I heard a voice. And the voice was saying to me, Mubarak to you. The voice was saying to me in the dream, glad tidings. Mubarak to you, we have prepared for you a mansion. We have prepared for you a mansion which when you see, your eyes will be delighted. Which when you see, your eyes will be delighted. And in 1 week from now, we will fill that mansion with fragrances. In 1 week from now, we will fill that mansion of yours with fragrances. And the name of that mansion that we have built for you is called Darus Surur, the house of delight, the house of happiness, the house of joy. The narrator says, he told me this, what he dreamt, and he went away. He said, exactly 7 days later on a JUMMAH, I saw him that he was going to make wudu in the river. He slipped and he fell and he drowned. Exactly 7 days later, he slipped and he fell into the river and he drowned. You must remember, drowning, death by drowning gives you the status and the level of the sawab of a martyr. Okay? The sawab of a martyr. He says that he slipped in the river and he drowned. He drowned, And after namaz Jummah that day, we buried him. He said, we buried him, and 3 days later, I saw him in my dream. 3 days later, I saw him in my dream dressed in a green garb. Dressed in a green garb. I asked him, how is everything? What is your condition? He said, as promised, Almighty Allah entered me into Darus Surur. Allah entered me into the house of delight. 7 days before he had dreamt, 10 days before, he had dreamt that 7 days, in 7 days we will fragrance the house for you, which we have prepared for you. 7 days later he passes away. 3 days later he comes in the dream of this pious man. Says, Almighty Allah has entered me into the house of delight. The narrator says, tell me about that mansion. Tell me about that mansion which you entered. He said, it is impossible for me to describe it. He said, it is impossible for me to describe it, and it is impossible for you to perceive it. Neither can I describe it, nor can you understand it. He says, but I wish my family would know something. I wish my family would know something. That because of their sincere attachment to me, there are houses prepared next to mine for them also. There are houses prepared next to mine for them also. And then he looks at the narrator. The narrator says, he says to me that every blessing is found in that house. And he then looks at the narrator and he says to the narrator, and you listen, there is also a mansion for you. There is also a mansion for you. What is the gist of all of this? That they did whatever they did for the akhirat. Whatever they prepared for the akhirat. And before they left the world, Allah gave them basharat of their house in Jannah. Allah gave them glad tidings of their mansion in Jannah. But it teaches you something, that if you hold firm to those who are firm in Allah's deen, to those who are Allah fearing, then because of them you too will get that which they are getting. This pious servant of Allah only drank from where he drank. He went there and he stood where he stood, and he drank from where he drank. He got a mansion in Jannah because of that there. So if you walk in the footsteps of the pious servants of Allah, and you keep the company of the pious servants of Allah, and they say that you are ours, your dunya is also made and your akhirat is also made. This is what we have to think about. And this is another way of taking the heart on this spiritual journey. To understand, for the heart to understand. Because when the heart realizes, then everything else will be perfected. Allah keep us with iman, let us keep this work with iman. Those who are ill, Allah grant them shifa, kamil, said ajil. Those that have passed away in Ahlul Sunnah, Allah exalt them in Jannat al-Na'im. Special dua for the Sunni Muslims of Palestine, Lebanon, wherever else in the world that they are going through difficulties. The Muslims of India that are going through a difficult time as well now. May Allah make it easy upon them. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give sakht badla to those zalims and the enemies of Islam. Allah ta'ala keep us firm, mazhab Ahlul Sunnah wal Jamaat. Mani billah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.